Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to AMO Art Chat. We got a great show tonight. We have CW Mundy with us, and I'll be getting to CW here in a couple minutes. I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. This is our second in Weekend with the Masters series of interviews, and next week on June 21st, we actually have one of our regularly scheduled shows, and that'll be with Wayne Johnson, who's a musician and a friend of mine, and we'll be talking about investigating the creative process. Wayne is a musician just like CW is, so you're actually going to get a foreshadow of that show this evening as we talk to CW about his music a little bit later on this evening as well. The chat window is open, so if you are listening to us live, please feel free to log into the chat window, and if you have any questions during the show, please post them in the chat window, and we'll try to get them on air. And there is also a number at the top of the screen for guest call-in. I'm not going to promise if you call that number that I'll get you on the air, but if you'd like to try, that's fine. It just depends on how the conversation's going, on whether or not I can get to you or not. So your best way of getting questions to us is actually to do it through the chat window. It's a lot easier for me to kind of keep up with everybody who's logged in on the chat window than it is to actually go back and forth on the phones. So let me introduce our host, and we'll get right to CW because we have a lot to talk about tonight. Blanche McAlister Harris is with us tonight. Hello, Blanche.
Hi, Linda. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I actually got to the studio to paint a little bit today, so I'm kind of happy. I got rid of those blues. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I've been trying to get to my studio, going through reference photos and getting ready to start a new painting, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah.
If all goes well.
Yeah, I'm going to get back in that studio tomorrow while the paint's still wet so I can work wet into wet. So,
yeah,
I think we're in the same boat. So, okay,
yeah.
Well, I want to get right to CW because I know there are a lot of folks are calling in and want to hear him more than they want to hear us. So, CW is an impressionist artist. He's living in Indianapolis. He was born and raised in Indiana. He actually attended Ball State University, graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And then he traveled out to California where he painted, and played music and worked on his Master of Fine Arts degree at Long Beach State. And then in 1978, he returned home to Indiana, worked as a sports illustrator for a decade, and then in the early 1990s, took on the challenge of painting in a more impressionistic style, going out of doors and painting on plein air and from life. He's had a number of trips to Europe, and I guess that began back in 1995 when he traveled to France, and then he still travels overseas today. In 2007, he achieved master status with the American Impressionist Society, and we actually have some questions from our fellow members at the American Impressionist Society as part of our show tonight, so we'll actually highlight when we ask their questions. And then in 2003, he was invited to Master Signature membership in the in the Oil Painters of America group. And he's a signature member of American Society of Marine Artists. Welcome, CW. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great, girls. It's exciting to be here, and let's get to it, baby. I've got a slogan. It's a hillbilly colloquial. I'll treat you a whole bunch of different ways. You're bound to like one of them.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw it to Blanche, who's going to ask you the first question. We're going to actually start talking a little bit about your travels. So go ahead, Blanche.
All right. CW, I saw on your website that you just returned from Massachusetts where you were painting. You said it's one of your favorite places to paint. Why do you like Massachusetts so much?
Well, it's not so much that it's Massachusetts, but it's Gloucester, Rockport, it's harbors. You know, I love the old dirty fishing villages, the blue collar places where they're actually doing something and doing it as a career and making money instead of floating around in those Clorox bottles, you know, the real expensive white yachts with the perfect white sails and all the gold and necklaces and all that stuff. I'm not into that. I like the blue-collar places, and Gloucester has such great history. You know, there were a host of painters that painted there at the turn of the century: Anthony Teamy, Aldro Hibbert, Emile Gruppe, Frederick Mulhop, Willard Metcalf, and I think even Twachtman painted out there, with just to name a few. And so it's just got a great heritage.
What are some of your other favorite spots to paint?
Everwar. No, actually, there's so many different. I love Europe. You know, you'd have to be brain dead not to go over and to go over in Europe and not find something to paint. This is probably the only good thing about socialism that happened to Europe, and that is that they still have the old buildings and they've got all that history that we don't have in our buildings. You know, you build a building in America, and 50 years later you have to tear it down because the real estate's worth more than the building. So back then, it's just so much antiquity, beautiful sculptures, beautiful architecture. I'm just in love with Europe. I love Europe. I can't get enough of it. And there's great places all across this wonderful country to paint, too. You know, we like to go out west. We like the Midwest. We have these big overcast days that the California plein air painters don't want to paint because they have to have light shadow. But talk to Dan Gerhardt and myself, and you get an opalescent day like that where we can really set a mood in a painting, and it's not just this bright light shadow that all the plein air painters think they have to paint.
So are you going over to Europe anytime soon, CW?
Well, we're thinking about maybe going back out again to France or maybe Italy. We've got some time slots that we've left open this year to see. You know, we pray about everything, and if we feel we get moved to go in one direction or the other, then and we do that. We don't like to stick ourselves in a box. I'm very careful about making commitments because you have to keep your commitments, and that could really mess up a chance to all of a sudden say, hey, we feel led to let's take off to Europe, or let's go somewhere and paint or do something, so.
You like to leave yourself free to travel.
Yeah, you want to leave those slots open as much as you can.
And it's kind of interesting. We were talking before we came on air, and you know that I work with Kevin McPherson, and one of the things that I had always asked Kevin, because he travels a lot as well and doesn't like a lot of commitments, so that he can just pick up and go like to his new favorite place, which is China. But I always ask him, how he gets all these different opportunities to travel. And one of the things that he has said is, he makes his own opportunities. And I'm assuming that that's true with you. I mean, you just don't have somebody calling you up and saying, hey, we want you to go over and paint 20 paintings of someplace in France, but you actually go make those opportunities to travel for yourself. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I do not. I don't need anybody to invent ideas for me. I have a hard enough problem being able to investigate all the things that I can creatively come up with, and I've turned down projects where they wanted me to be involved in a book or something like that because you have to go paint in these locations and that. that's not what an artist needs to do. He needs to go where his heart is and where the passion is and where he feels led to go and do it. I don't really want anybody else's ideas. I got enough ideas of my own, and that's the same thing with Kevin. And you make these opportunities happen. You don't sit around and wait for somebody to rescue you and come up with an idea. If that's what's going on with you as an artist, you're probably in the wrong profession.
And I've heard that so much from so many different artists that I think that's such great advice for everybody to hear. If you want to go to France, then go to France and paint. Don't wait for somebody to tell you to go to France and paint.
You've got to make it happen.
Right. You make your own opportunities. Don't wait for them to come to you. So
it's the same thing with the galleries. People are waiting. They think that, well, I'm going to be discovered. Negatory, not going to happen, wouldn't be prudent. You've got to make your career happen, and you've got to do it, and don't leave it up to somebody else. I thank the Lord about that. He's given us the wisdom. My wife, Rebecca, is not only my wife, but the most important business partner in this whole CW Mundy fine art thing, and we are progressive with everything. We take everything under consideration, and we do logical things that will give us the attention that we need to become the trade that we've been able to come in the industry. You'll not become a trade name in the industry if you don't take control of your career. It's one thing to paint, and it's one thing to launch your career, but it's a whole other thing to sustain it, and you have to be fully responsible, and that's one of the things that I teach in my workshops on Thursday afternoon. For those who are painting to have a career, I spend about 2.5 hours, and I tell them my whole story, how I launched the career, and tell them they're no different. And if they really are serious, there are prudent things that you need to do. So, and I'm grateful that God had given me that ability to have that business sense. You just can't sit around and paint great paintings if nobody can see them, and if you don't get the right publicity, and if you don't push yourself out there in front of the market, then nobody's going to know. You'll be a shelf artist the rest of your career.
Right, and it's an important thing to do. There's a balance there. You have to continue to paint, but you also have to do that business end. And that's
where I'm fortunate because I have my wife to do. In fact, when we started the fine art thing, our gallery manager and my wife told me, they said, look, we'll take care of everything in the business that we need to take care of, and you do what you can do, and you paint. And I'm so grateful because, believe me, the amount of people that come and take my workshops, and the majority of these people are women, and they don't have a spouse to do because their spouse is working and playing golf, and they don't have somebody like I'm so fortunate to have a wife and a partner that does all of that. And, of course, I get to be in the decision-making too, but, I mean, it does. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and effort. So, believe me, I know how I'm very grateful and very blessed at what my wife Rebecca does, because otherwise I wouldn't have a career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the business side takes so much time. A lot of people don't realize that.
Yes, ma'am.
CW, I wanted to ask you a question that I've gotten from Ellie, who's a member of the American Impressionist Society. She wanted me to ask you what your takeaway was from your recent trip, the recent class you attended with Sherri McGraw on drawing. I think it was in Connecticut.
Oh, man, I could spend go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, I could spend the rest of the program talking about that. I mean this as serious a statement as I can make about anything. In my estimation, Sherri McGraw is probably one of the finest draftsmen I know in the country, and maybe one of the finest draftsmen in the world. And she got that from really paying attention to David. And David really taught her the shorthand of drawing, and she worked very hard at it. She's got one of the most beautiful, graceful styles, and I was able to see that. And then I bought her book, and after I bought her book and read it, I was very interested because I grew up, and my education in drawing was measuring one thing against another, measuring one thing against another. And that's what I've been teaching for 20 years. And all of a sudden I run into Sherri and find out that that's not what you really want to do, because the problem with that is you left brain everything to death. And she made a comment that, the classical realists, they'll spend 300 hours on a 30 by 20 drawing of the figure, and when they're done with it, they've got a very stiff, boring, no form or movement in the form whatsoever, static drawing that will bore you to death. And if you look at Michelangelo, Peter Paul Rubens, Nikolai Feshin, Rembrandt, Da Vinci, and you see these masters and see how they were able to form overlaps form, and that's a way of foreshortening by signaling that in the drawing. And the other tips that she has that she gleaned, that David gleaned, I'm speaking of David LaFell, that David gleaned from in all of his study and research. And so you're pulling from the greatest of the greatest. And I was so amazed that I found out these things that I really had no handle on and was not doing in my career, and getting the beautiful form and the movement of the form. It's one thing to see a shape, but that's what you need to do, because that's the foundation of every good painting. You got to identify the value shapes and the shapes and see how they're relating to each other. But on top of that, the next big thing is you've got to understand the form of that shape. And then once you're able to get the gesture of that shape and the gesture of the form, you're home free, baby. Now your art's going to have thread of what the greatest masters that ever created art. And that's what I tell you. As I said, I could talk, the whole show could be about what I learned from Sherri McGraw and how much I love her and respect her, and how grateful I am, because how influential I've already done my first two paintings since I've been back, and they have that movement and that form and that understanding of the overlapping form that the masters did to show mass and to show movement and everything. And so I'm just like I don't know what expression to say other than I'm so grateful. I'm like a kid at Christmas.
But it sounds like you had a real aha moment there. I mean,
yes, I did. It was a major epiphany, and when you can say what I'm saying, and believe me, I'm not just saying it, as my father said, I'm not just whistling Dixie. I mean it, and Sherri knows I mean it. And I've said to her, I said in front of the class that we did a dual demo, and I told every artist there, I said, you know what? Every brand out there in the industry, every brand name, and I'm talking about the big boys and the big girls, and everybody else that's doing art, needs to take her drawing class, because it will take them to a level that they cannot even fathom. And I told Sherri 2/3 through the class, I said, you know what, I'm changed, and I don't know how all this is going to work, but I know that I'm going to be able to apply that, and I apply it to my landscapes, I apply it to the still lives, I apply it to painting, even though drawing and painting are two different mediums. And I'm going to be a whole lot better artist. I already am, because
Wow,
of
that's
that
exciting.
Sherri McGraw's class. So that's a plug for her, and I love her, and she is awesome. You don't meet a sweeter, nicer person.
It sounds like a lot of us need to look into that, a whole new approach.
Oh, yes, it'll wake you up. And when you think about it, think about this. You're using the most important stuff that we've been able to glean from in the history of art from the greatest artists that ever lived. You know, it's pretty interesting. Part of my quest was, you know, everybody talks about, well, you know, and everybody's looking at Sargent, and everybody's looking at Zorn, and everybody's looking at Sorolla, and you hear their names mentioned, and rightly so, because those guys are masters. Don't get me wrong. But who did they look to? They looked to Peter Paul Rubens, Michelangelo, Rembrandt. And I'll tell you another discovery that just blew my mind on this quest. I answered my own questions, you know, and that's what I answered. I said, well, everybody's talking about these guys, but who did these guys, Velázquez, and I looked at him, and I looked at a few other artists, and what was amazing, because everybody knows I'm an edge freak, and when I finally got to Rembrandt, I was so blown away, because Rembrandt was the guy that took more liberties with edges than any other major famous artist, important artist in history that I know of. He took more liberties with edge work, and that's what I love, because, you know, edges is one of the foundational tenets of the science of painting, and he took a lot of liberties, and so I'm really on the other extreme from the ultra-conservatives that say, you know, oh, God forbid, don't make up anything. All you have to do is just see. You know, well, that's the beginning part. Yeah, you've got to see what's going on, but you need to paint the way you see, and that's a whole other story with, you know, with edges. When we see the human being, when he sees and he looks, if I was sitting in the booth with you guys, and I'm looking at Linda or Blanche, and if I'm looking at one of their faces, I only see 15% is in focus, and everything else is out of focus. Why? Because God made us that way, so we could have intelligent conversations, and we could focus on what we need to focus. So that is the way you need to paint. You know, you figure out where the centrality of focus is. You can have your strongest edge, your strongest color, your heaviest paint, whatever, and you can anchor that in what you really want people to really look at, and then everything else, as it moves away from that, becomes less important, less edgy, or more edgy, and you knock the edges off, and more out of focus, and less important. You know, editing, like what George said, the biggest ball game in town is design, and it's all about the directorship. I had a conversation with Gerhardt about a month and a half before I went down to Florida this winter, and I told Dan, I confessed to Dan, I said, you know, I have to really confess, I've really fallen asleep. I could be so much, with all the stuff that I know, I could be so much better director, and why am I not doing that? You know, why am I not being the director that I can be? Because that's what George was talking about, and that's what it is. You know, you think about it, the movie in Hollywood that wins Best Picture and wins the Oscar, guess who else wins the Oscar? The director. You know, and the point being is your subject, you can have the most beautiful subject in front of you, just like they can have Tom Cruise or Soleil or whoever, Brad Pitt, whatever, great actors, great-looking actresses, great script, great screenwriting, great music, and if the directorship is a C+ or a B-, that movie is never going to be the number one, you know, the one that wins the Oscar. So it's the same thing with your painting. If you don't take on the responsibility of directing that subject the way it needs to be directed, then you're going to have mediocrity the rest of your life in painting. So that's why you need to know the science which I know we're going to talk about later. I know I'm running off. I'm just going off on stuff that I find, what I want to tell the audience, Linda and Blanche, is the same thing that I want to tell all my students is, there's a real logical approach to the science of painting, and the more logic that you have, that gives you the more freedom and the more ability for the natural voice of who you are and who you can be as an artist come out. But you're only crippled if you do not understand the science of painting. You're totally crippled, and you cannot march up the ladder in the industry, and you cannot become the painter that you can become if you ignore the science. Red is the complementary green, blue is the complementary orange, yellow is the complementary purple. That's the way it is. That's the way the brain sees it. That's the way the history of art talks about it. That's a fact, And so painting is really all about factual stuff and spinning it in a very creative way.
Yeah, George, you took me back to George Gallo, and now I feel like I'm talking to George again. But CW, I want to take you back a second to you were talking about Rembrandt, and I had the privilege of seeing Rembrandt in America down in North Carolina. That was an exhibit where they had some Rembrandts and then some paintings that were attributed to Rembrandt, and some of them were attributed falsely, and they're in question now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was really interesting. I don't know, Blanche, that was like down in your neck of the woods, so hopefully you got over to see it as well. But I
didn't see it myself, but I did hear about it.
Okay. Well, I was walking around, spending a lot of time looking at the different ones, and there were ones that they still have not unattributed, if that's the word, to Rembrandt. But I really questioned if they were, because when you stand in front of a Rembrandt, or even a Stetson for that matter, and you look at the way that they handle the edges, and the way that they handle color, and in the design, if you want to go even back to that far, I mean, it's just so much. It's just so magnificent. I've heard the story where David LaFell has actually looked at paintings, and maybe it was Rembrandt, it may have been somebody else, and actually got tears in his eyes because, and I've heard it's also for Richard Schmidt, it's because they feel like they have so much more to learn, and they're not there. And hearing your aha moment from you is just so amazing, and so reinforces that even at the level that you are at, you are still growing and still challenging yourself and still learning.
Oh, yeah, I'll tell you, I'm going to take Laura Robb's class because I was one of the artists that brought her down to a Touch of Spring, which is down in southern Indiana. And Carolyn, I got Carolyn to come down and teach. I taught, and this last year, and I got Laura Robb to come. And the thing that I learned from her, even though I haven't taken her class, I heard it from the students, is her ability to use transparent colors. And this is one of the great things, beautiful parts of her paintings when she does the florals and she does China and all this, that transparent look, because if you think about it, like Flow Blue, that's a transparent wash that's going on an opaque white. And to create that with opaque paint, I had an epiphany there, and I'm going, well, dummy, that's so logical. Why? And I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that? So I got to know Laura, and I just think the world of her. She's a very, she knows, she's got the left brain down. She knows the science, but she's very creative and uses the right side of her hemisphere, and she's one of those people that I just love their work because it's so poetic. And so I'm going to take, she doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to take her class because I want to sit under her and have her slap my hand and tell me, oh, yeah, now that's it, there you go, because I'm going to, like you said, if you ever think that you've got the handle on everything, boy, you're heading for the trash can. There is so much to learn out there, and it's so exciting, and it's going to make us all better artists, and you're an absolute fool if you don't take classes from the people that really understand what they're doing. It's, I've seen so many people that have taken my classes, how their careers have been launched because they paid attention, and they don't paint the way I paint. When I teach classes, that's the last thing that I want them to be involved in is how I paint. What I teach them is the science of painting and make sure they understand the science, and then they go off and then paint the way they feel led to paint, because that's what the market's looking for. They don't need another CW Mundy. They don't need another David LaFell. They don't need another Dan Gerhardt, Carolyn Anderson, Sherri McGraw, whoever, the industry already has that. They're looking for somebody like, I was just on the phone with Carolyn today, and I told her, I said, I tell my students this, I quote her all the time. I quote all the people that I've learned stuff from and give them credit, but I said, Carolyn says, I've seen that before. Show me something I haven't seen. Now, there you go, girls. Now, that's the search that we need to be on, is to find some way to express something a little bit differently so nobody, and people haven't seen it. And that's what launched my career, because, I was scolded in the beginning because, he's using the Kleenex, and he's scuffing the canvas with a Kleenex, and he's the Kleenex king and all that. Well, I'll tell you what, it gave me a totally different identity than anybody else in the industry, and it launched my career, and I learned a lot about it, because I'll tell you girls, sometimes I'm a one-ply Kleenex, and sometimes I'm a two-ply, and that is because that's what it requires. You see what I mean? So that all has to do with paint manipulation. If you're just going to paint your painting with a stupid, boring brush and everything's painted the same way, negatory. You got a boring-looking painting. You need to make as many different variety of registrations on that canvas that you can with paint and still have it unified. Now you got something going, baby.
I'm so glad you said that. Because I was painting today, as you know, I said that in the beginning, and I got done basing in everything basically, and I just looked at it and went, okay, it's boring. So tomorrow afternoon we're gonna take a palette knife to it, and I'm gonna see what I can do to this. I just keep, at this point, with the study that I have, I want to start reaching out and exploring what I can do, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. What did I didn't lose anything. I learned something from it, even if it's a failure. And all you can keep it as a failure.
You're exactly right. Look, your failures will be the greatest teachers that you'll ever have, because you'll know not to do that again. And I tell my students, and I say that to you and Linda and Blanche, listen, you'll never know how far left is or how far right is until you go out and hang out on that edge. And you can always come back to what the builders call Hoyle. You can always come back to a place that you feel comfortable with. But if you never, ever venture out, you never know. That may be the sweet spot. You see what I mean? And there's times when I'm out plein air painting and I got to put, a branch in, and so I just pick up find the twig that's going to do it, that's kind of gnarly and scratchy on the end, and I take that and scrape it right into wet paint. Bingo. If I would have done that with a paintbrush, boring, too much control, too left brain, not going to work. It's taking your painting down a notch, So those are the things with experience that you learn, because I think the biggest thing that I discuss and talk about is that's the biggest problem that artists face, because they don't have the adventurousness, and they don't have the confidence, and so they end up left-braining everything to death, and that's why they got a boring piece of artwork for people to look at, because they left-brain it to death. So, the problem is, girls, we're control freaks. Let's admit it. We're control freaks. And if we get a chance, we'll suck the blood out of everything. But you have to know these things, and when the sirens come up and you're looking to go, it's boring, okay, well then you kick into the mode of being creative and go for it. You know, one of the great things that I learned from Whistler, he says, I build the form and I destroy it. I build it and I destroy it. I build it and I destroy it. And by going through all those different processes, you've got a piece of artwork. It would be, the only thing that can copy that is a digital camera. Mm-hmm. You know, a human effort would be totally impossible, and that ends up being the beauty. But these people that lay down the same brushstroke next to the same brushstroke next to the same brushstroke, you know, and you know they doing it early and they're going, oh boy, man, these brushworks look really beautiful, you know, and they won't ever touch it. Well, you know, if you think about it, the logical conclusion to brushwork is when you start the painting is neutralize as much of the brushwork as you can in the beginning, and then when you're going to the centrality of focus and you're going to tell your story and you're going to really make this thing happen, that's when the brush gets happy, and that's when you start making registrations that count. But if you get too many registrations that start counting in the beginning, the only way you can conclude that painting is to go to rendering. And how many of us want to sit down and render?
No thanks.
Yeah, I think that's something that happens to everyone, though. You're painting, you're beginning to like it, and then it becomes too precious.
Oh, yeah.
And you're afraid to get a little loose with it. You know, you get tense about things once you start liking it too much.
Matt Smith was watching me paint, and I was watching him because I'm a big fan, and we collect Matt's work, and we were painting in Laguna Beach, and he came up behind me, and I was doing it, and he says, oh, man, he says, I can't believe, he says, I would never do that, you know, because he's so thought-provoking. I mean, he's so, everything is so calculated, and, of course, now he's changed over the years since that, and he's deliberately done some things that he said that he could never do because, you know, I don't know whether the work was so precious or he didn't know how to get out of that, but that's just the way that he was going to do. And his paintings were still beautiful then, as they're beautiful now. But I think, you know, everyone has to graduate into different experiences. Sometimes you have to be told, and sometimes you don't have to be told. Sometimes it's just looking at it and seeing it. But if you control everything with so much deliberately, you know, you can end up with a very unmoving, static piece of artwork, and that type of artwork doesn't really give the audience a chance to participate because it doesn't have the poetic. That's why poetry is some of the finest literature out there, is because it's so poetic and people can put their lives into it because it's open for that. But the minute that you close the doors and become so literal, that closes out your audience because there's only a certain brand of people that want to participate with that and aren't invited. Are invited, and so that's what's so beautiful about Impressionism. It's the most revered art form because it's the probably most poetic out there, and leaves a lot more room for interpretation. You got a lot larger audience.
Absolutely. So
that's good advice.
Yes, it is. Let's move into the Weekend with the Masters, your workshops there. How many Weekends with the Masters have you done, CW?
I've done 2. I did the one in, the first one was down at Dana Point, and then we did Monterey last year, and then this year we're going to do it down in San Diego.
Okay. And then if there was one thing that it's probably what you were just telling us, but I'll go ahead and ask the question anyway. If there's one thing that you could instill in your students after they leave their workshop, your workshop, what would that be? That one?
All of the above.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
All of the above. There's no need of going over all of that, but that's really the nuts and bolts of it. You know, people are so worried. You know, they go, "Gee, I really want to find my voice," and I said, "Well, you know what? You need to learn how to paint first." You know, here's the deal. You have to become a painter before you become an artist. Everybody wants to be an artist. You watch, you know, American Idol. I love the program. And there you go, well, my parents say I'm great. You know, well, they've had no education. They haven't studied voice. You know, they haven't trained their voice, haven't done any studying or anything, and they just sing, you know. And it's the same thing, you know, you have to know the science before you can really become, quote, an artist and graduate into that. You have to become a painter, because a painter needs to know how to copy the subject, copy value, copy the edges, make a head look like a human head and not a dinosaur. You know, the list goes on and on. Those are all the things that you have to accomplish before you graduate into an artist. You have to become a painter first, because you have to learn how to understand your craft. And once you understand your craft, then quickly you can graduate into becoming an artist, because if a lot of people just end up in the business of ended up staying being a painter, they're not an artist at all. They're still a painter, because they're trapped into like what George said. There's certain things. You know, you cannot copy the landscape and make it as beautiful as it is, because God did that. It's totally impossible. But what you can do is put your personality and your slant on what that landscape means to you, and then be creative and tweak it and move a tree, like Edgar Payne says in his design book. If you got to move a rock or a tree, don't be an idiot. Move it if it's going to make a better design. So in other words, you got to pay the dues to become a painter, and then once you really know the craft and you've got a certain amount of time experience in that, then you graduate and then you become an artist, because a painter is not a means to an end. We don't need a lot more painters out there. What we need are a lot more people that are really artists. It's a real journey to become an artist, you know, and I'm still becoming an artist.
Mhm.
Thank God.
Create rather than replicate the scene.
Yeah, you know, if you want to get into that, if that's a means to an end, and that's what some of the ultra-conservative people who are out there in the business, and there are a lot of those that are brand names too, they think that you're really knocking the doors down if you can do a great job of copying. That's just the beginning. Are you going to be a slave to copying the value, a slave to copying the edges, a slave to copying the color, a slave to copying the subject? You know, God gave us a brain and gave us the right and left hemisphere. You use the left hemisphere to solve your problems, and then you use the right side to be creative. That's what the audience wants. They want to see, like what Carolyn Anderson said. I've seen that before. Show me something I haven't seen. And then that's when you're really, starting to cut the mustard. And there's still so much room for somebody to come in the industry and give us a different attitude and a different look at that. But if you're going to stay in that zone and just think you're really cutting the mustard because you can really do a great job of copying, I kind of feel sorry for those people, because they've missed the whole point. Hmm. You know, art is a big word, and high art is even bigger. And there's no reason why all of us can't get in that position to create high art. We just got to take the science and then start letting people know who we are, and it's your lifetime, it's your whole life experience, it's everything, all wrapped up into that paintbrush, the towel, the palette knife, whatever you're making marks on that canvas. You can end up making yourself vulnerable to the public, and that's what the public wants. You know, they're just, those collectors are out there just waiting to put that money down on your painting.
So true. I wanted to there was a lady, I'm assuming it's by the name of Johanna Harmon, who just is in the chat room, who's listening to us live, and she wanted me to thank you, CW, for reminding everyone to be fearless.
Oh yeah, I love her. Johanna called me up one time because she took my Kevin's thing in plein air masters in Europe, and she took photographs of me with my Billy Bob teeth and my cigars, and she said, "Can I put that on the internet?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "If I can't laugh at myself, and I look pretty goofy, and I look, so anyway, but I love her, and I tell you what, there is a girl, a prime example, that goes and studies with people, and I don't mean me. I mean, yes, she studied with me, and hopefully I helped her, but she studied with Gerhardt's, she studied with other artists, and look what she's able to paint. She's a very, very good artist. She's not a painter, she's an artist, and she's, really producing great work. And what she said about being fearless, the more that you take on that attitude and are willing to take chances and find out how far left is and how far right is, you're going to move up the food chain in the industry a lot quicker. But if you just stay really...
Sorry, CW, just typed, "Yes, you helped me."
She's just a dear soul, and now she's a brand name in the industry. She's won major awards. She won a big award with Oil Painters of America and probably countless others, and she's really doing beautiful figure work.
Great. She also wanted to know, sorry, hold on one second, Blanche, get this one last question because I think a lot of folks would also be interested in this. She wanted me to ask you who you think the most poetic living artist is.
Oh, I'd have to sit down and think about that. And I think the answer to that is not who is. Of course, I know it'd be a neat thing to think about, but then, on one day I might say it's this person, another day I might say it's that person. But I think more importantly is just ask yourself, how can I be that poetic,
living artist,
mysterious? George, I'll tell you a story George told me that just proves my point. And man, I was so grateful that he told me. We're up in at Weekend with the Masters up in Monterey, and we're up in this lady's room, and we're having some great conversation. And George says, "Yeah, CW," says, "I had this French girlfriend, man, when I was a young painter," and he says, "we were having a couple of glasses of wine, and I was fixing dinner for her, and I said I had her look at my painting, and he said, so I'm sitting there, I go, so what do you think?" So she looks at the painting, then she looks back at George. She looks back at the painting again, she looks at George. Then she looks back at the painting again for a minute, she looks at George, and he goes, "Well, what do you think?" She goes, "George?" And he goes, "Yeah. No mystery." And that's my point, and that's when I think George had a major epiphany, because I'm sure they discussed that, and she explained, hey, if you tell everybody way too much and give them too much information, i.e. being too literal, you look at it, you walk on because you get the message, and that's it. But if there's mystery, you're going, well, is that a palette knife rock, or is that a ship in the distance, or what is that? A photographer told me that one time, a very good photographer. He said, "I like to look at photographs that have things in there that you can't really figure out." If you look at Anders Zorn, he's got these abstract Salvador Dali stuff going on in the background, and you don't know if it's a coffee pot percolator or whatever it is, but it's got shape and design and it's abstract, but it makes you, it's another element of the painting that makes you want to look at it longer and see if you can figure that out. So you know, that was a great thing that George shared with me, and I've told my students, and I share that with the audience here today. You know, you need some mystery in your work. You know, guys, you want to be you want to be somebody that's cutting the mustard, man. Get some mystery in there.
Oh, that's a good story. CW, in your workshop at the Weekend with the Masters, you're going to be teaching or painting still life, and you'll be talking about the science of painting, which we've sort of been talking about for the last few minutes. Tell us about the 7 foundation truths.
Well, first of all, I came up with the number 7 because it's a biblical number, and, you know, that's spiritually, this is the most important thing to me, is my relationship with the Lord. My painting is just a way to provide for my family and for missions and for people that need help and things like that. But that's what really makes me tick. Let's see, what was the? No, I got off on a tangent there. What was the question again? What?
Well, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about the 7 foundation truths.
Oh, okay, yeah, obviously, I was going. It's 7 is a biblical number, an important biblical number, but also equally as important is the fact that there are. I boiled it down to 7 tenets, what I call the architecture of painting, and that's drawing, squinting, design, value, color, edges, and paint manipulation. And then I go on with talking about variety and unity in each one of those disciplines, which is huge. And then I go and talk about the alien factor, the association factor, and the face factor, because those are all 3 elements that are very crucial and important in painting.
Mm-hmm. We've just been talking, well, we've already talked about the interview with George Gallo last week and him talking about being us being the director of our painting. Does your directorship of painting discuss this design, or does it touch on all the elements from the start to the finish of the painting?
Well, I talk about I discuss in great detail. Now, Weekend at the Masters, because they will only be with me a day. You know, you can only, like Allison says, you can only give them a thumbnail, and that thumbnail is what you try to give some of the most important stuff that you can. But it's an encouragement for them. If they really want to get down to business, then they come and take your class for a week. So I discuss the foundational truths, and then I've really been a stickler on talking about the directorship and taking the serious responsibility that we need to take in authoring work and being that director and not falling asleep in the director's chair. But really, in other words, one of the key things that I discuss in my workshops is one of the greatest things that I gleaned from Dan Gerhardt's. I'd had a master's degree, teaching degree in art, and studied under some great painters, but nobody told me to solve all your problems up first before you ever dip the brush, and that came right out of the mouth of Dan Gerhardt's. And there's not a smarter thing to point out, and that's what I really help them do, and that's where the directorship comes in. You need to know. In fact, your subject is your enemy to start out with, and then it ends up being your best friend if you do what you wanted to do, and you do it with great directorship. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you like 2 more questions on art, CW. We're coming up to an hour, and like I said, we got 90 minutes scheduled for tonight, and I want to get to your music. So these are the final 2 questions that we're going to ask on art, and then we're going to switch over to your musical pursuits. First question is Susan from American Impressionist Society wanted to know what kind of brushes and palette knives you use.
My students, they come to the workshops, and they got these little knick-knack, paddywhack palette knives that are about, half an inch by a quarter, and I don't know what, those would probably be good if you're going to do a painting an inch by an inch, maybe. But I tell them that those things need to hit the wastebasket. And I like the palette knives, those ones that are about an inch and a quarter that are rounded on the tips, rounded on the sides, and then I like the larger ones. I do use different sizes for different needs. Just like I said, sometimes I'm a 1-ply Kleenex, and sometimes I'm a 2-ply. The 1-ply is for real intricate, strategic stuff that you don't want to move around paint as much, and then the 2-ply is for, you really want to molest the surface of the painting. And so palette knives, it comes with experience, and you find out what works best for you. But the instrument is a lot more important than just sticking the paint on and putting it on like cake frosting. People think they're really cutting the mustard. There's a lot that palette knife will do and skip, and you can load it up. You can load up the palette knife as you can load up the brush with a lot of marbleizing and get a lot more bang for your buck on the canvas. I forget who the great master was, but he said, really what happens is the best painting that they got is not the one that they finished with, that they're hanging on the wall. The best painting they got is their palette. And that's what that's another thing about being bold, like what Johanna was saying, being bold and getting out there. Get some stuff out there on that canvas that you might not normally do. You can always control it. You can always back it down a little bit if it's too garish or too gaudy, or if it's causing a problem. But, you ought to do some mixing on your canvas. Instead of just mixing all the paint down there, you might find out that you might have a lot more interesting paintings. So paintbrushes, I love the lady from England. What's her name?
Rosemary?
Yeah, Rosemary. I love those. Matt Smith taught me to use those Mongoose Natural. I saw him paint, how beautifully he painted those paintings, and I was using pig bristle. Now, pig bristle has a real point to it. If you want to leave grooves in your paint, that's a really wonderful instrument to do that. The natural mongoose will give you less striations in the paint and have a whole different feel. I like the long flats. I used to use the short flats, and then the first time I used the long rosemary flat, I called this artist buddy of mine that I paint with a lot, Todd Reifers, who lives in Indianapolis. He's a very good painter. I called him up and I said, hey, man, you got to try these new rosemary, the long flats. And he goes, oh, yeah, really? And I go, yeah, man. I said, I started painting with it, and I said, I hated it when I started off. He says, well, why is that? And I said, it was like using a mop. And then I got so that I liked the mop instead of the short flats. And then another thing, I was out painting with Robert Gruppe, who's the son of the famous Emile Gruppe in Gloucester, and I noticed that he used a lot of rounds. And I thought, well, hello, idiot. This is why your paintings look the way they look. You like what Robert's got going. Why don't you use some rounds? So I've been painting these last two paintings. I used some flats. The flat has its purpose, and the purpose will be unique to the artist. There's no formula. And the rounds, think about the rounds. You can put that registration down, and when you pull it off, guess what? It comes to a really beautiful point. Isn't that wonderful? Or you can mash it down, and it'll come to a round instead of a chisel. Everybody thinks, well, I've got to use the flats because I want that chisel look like Clyde Asplevig gets, with his paintings. And believe me, and they are beautiful, man. I don't know anybody that paints those snow scenes better than him. Edgar Payne didn't paint them as beautiful as Clyde's painted. But that's what that brush will do. It'll give you that chisel look. But you got to be careful because everything will be chiseled. Hello. So, using a variety of different marks on your canvas, those rounds, and you can scumble with them. You can mash them down like you mash the flats down, and they'll give you, but I really like it because this stuff that I got from Sherri McGraw in getting beautiful, graceful forms. I hope you people out there that are listening to this interview will get Sherri McGraw's book on, it's called, oh, great, the title is, it's not the shorthand of drawing, but, it's the language of drawing. Get that book and read it. It's a real easy, quick read. It's just unbelievable. And she's got such a beautiful, graceful look to her drawings and her work and her paintings. And this is the thing, even though that I want to be the molestation king and, really mess up the paintings and lose edges and stuff like that, I can still have beautiful, graceful form, can I? That's something that I haven't had before. So I'm going to show the audience a whole nother new look that they haven't seen with CW Mundy. And I'm so excited because I got that from her. So, I want to, and this is a great plug for her because she's so deserving. It will change your life, and you will become a lot better artist because the girl knows what she's doing.
Okay. There's going to be a big run on her books tonight.
Well, that's good because I'm telling you what, man, I know what I'm talking about. I have a very good eye for great art because I've had a great education. I just can't paint that way yet, but I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I think I'm a good artist. I'm not a great artist, but I'm a good artist. But you know what? If I keep working hard and keep learning like I'm learning, and I still have the passion, I think someday I could be a great artist. And I would say that to everybody else out there. And I don't, that's not an egotistical statement. I hope people don't take it that way, but, that's my goals. I want to be, I would like to be a great artist. And it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of understanding, but thank God we've got people in the industry like Carolyn Anderson, Dan Gerhardt, Kwong Ho, Kevin McPherson, Clyde Aspavig, Richard Smith, Nancy Gusick, Scott Burdick, Sue Lyons. I could just keep going on and on. These people know a lot, and when you see something that you like about that, find out what it is, and then see how you can put a twist on that and use it in your work, because don't just copy their style. That's where a lot of people get misled. They think, well, if I could paint like Richard Smith, then I'll be in the Putney Painters, and then, I'll just be cutting the mustard. Well, Richard doesn't want you to paint just like him. He wants you to have your own brain. Just learn what he's doing and find a way to twist it. Take his language, his visual language, and make it unique to you. So, anyway, I'm going off on tangents.
That's okay. What I'm going to do now, CW, is I am going to start your Door County Cove song, and then I want to listen to that for a couple minutes, and I'll turn the volume down, and I want you to talk to us about, while it's playing in the background, your journey in making music. So let me start Door County Cove.
Okay.
Too much. Go ahead.
This is a project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I played professionally out in L.A. I played in Las Vegas. I played with Harry James Band, Phil Harris, Frank Sinatra Jr. at the famous Frontier Hotel. So I have a lot of history of music. At one time that I wanted that to be my career, but thank God he brought that to to an end when the girl that was in our major band, we're getting ready to sign with MCA. They'd just taken on Elton John, and they were going to make us the next nitty-gritty dirt band because we wrote all our music and we were an acoustical show band. But our fiddle player was dying of Hodgkin's disease, and she came back from Stanford from a chemotherapy treatment, and she had pretty much lost her mind, and that was the end of that. They had to take her back to France, and she passed away, and that was the end of the band. But God told me, He said, you know, I'm gonna have you do artwork, and you're gonna go back to your first love, and music's not gonna be your career. And I'm so grateful because this way I don't have to depend on, you know, a lot of other people. I just have to depend on my relationship with the Lord and my wife and my painting. And I can do that. But the music has always been a big love of mine, and so it was time for me to put down a track, a CD of all my original music, and that's what I did.
Now, did you find the creative process to be very similar when you're creating art and creating music?
It's all the same thing. You got to become a musician before you become an artist. You got to become a painter before you become an artist. And it's all the same thing. It's all about rhythm. It's all about movement. It's all about mood. It's all about personality. It's all about poetry. It's all about all of the same things. You know, audially. There's a lot of relationships between what happens to the ear, which is one of the five senses, and what happens to the eyes, which is another one of the five senses. So it's really pretty much all the same, you know. You can have a nice, that's why songs have a chorus, because they have a climactic point that they can return to. And then they've got verses. You know, it's the same thing with the painting. You've got a centrality of focus, and then you've got your supporting cast, which are the verses. And then you've got your tertiary airs in your painting, which cannot battle and be more important than the secondary, and it's the same thing with music. You've got the bass player playing at the right volume and the drummer playing at the right volume, so he's not obnoxiously running over the guy who's playing lead or whoever's singing. It's all the same stuff. Same thing with dance. Same thing with music, all the arts. They're all the same.
CW, I have a question here from Dwayne with the American Impressionist Society. He wanted me to ask you what kind of banjo you play.
I'm so blessed. I've got my buddy Steve Huber, who lives down in Nashville, Tennessee, and in my estimation, and I think many other people who are banjo players in the industry, think that he's making one of the finest banjos out there in the industry. He's by trade, he's an engineer, so he's done things with the electronics to mic to get the same vibration that a pre-war tone ring that will go on a Gibson, pre-war Gibson banjo, and the rim, the wood rim, which is maple, and get the same vibrations that those produce and manufacture that electronically to get the banjo to have the same sound. And I think for my money, he's probably got the closest that you're going to get to a pre-war banjo sound that's out there. Now, there are other people that are on the same quest and that are doing a nice job too, and I don't want to step on their toes. But I think Steve Huber has done probably one of the most outstanding jobs with that. And if you think about it, so you can spend $5,000 or $6,000 to get a killer, beautiful-looking and great-sounding banjo, instead of having to spend $75,000 to $100,000 to $150,000 to $250,000 to get a pre-war master tone. So he has a real place in the market, and couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And Steve is one of the finest banjo players out there in the industry.
Yeah. We also have another cut from your CD called Road to Damascus. Let's listen to that song a little bit.
Uh-oh. CW.
Okay, yeah, let him just listen to the fiddle to come and take his break. It comes up shortly, so you can hear some of the other music. It'll be up in just a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Tell us how this song came about, CW.
Well, Road to Damascus is the biblical story of Saul, who was out to kill and destroy as many Christians as he could, and he was on the way to Damascus to kill a few more, and the apparition of Christ knocked him off his horse, and he became Paul, one of the greatest living apostles, to write some of the greatest epistles in the New Testament ever written. So it's that most important story of Apostle Paul, of Saul becoming Apostle Paul, and instead of killing Christians, trying to minister to them through the word that the Holy Spirit gave him. So that's why it's called Road to Damascus. And the reason I wanted you to play the fiddle is I want people to know out there that CD is not just about CW Mundy. Yes, I wrote the music and directed it, but I have some of the finest musicians in all of Nashville that are, thank God, are friends of mine that played on this CD. And the whole thing about that CD was I wanted to produce a piece of art. I didn't want to produce just a regular 145 bluegrass CD that so many of the bluegrassers are doing, because I love jazz and swing and contemporary bluegrass and a lot of other music. I grew up with a big band sound, Tony Dorsey, people like that, my parents played all the time. So I like a lot of music, and it was just time for me to. My wife agreed, and so we spent the money to produce songs that I had written, and then I was able to, as I said, director. I have one of the greatest engineers in the industry, Scott Vestal, and Scott is probably, by most banjo players would agree with this in the industry. Scott's one of the finest, if not the greatest, maybe living banjo player. And he is equally a genius at engineering. And so I knew that I wanted to bring Scott in on the project because Scott and I are good friends, and he did a masterful job. It's like I said about the directorship. I can have great players and all that and have pretty good songs, but if he doesn't spin it right and record it right and mix it right, I got nothing. And that's one of the great things, that comments that people make about the CD. There's not a blemish on the CD. Well, maybe my playing, but everything else is it's just a brilliant piece of artwork. And I know people might think, well, boy, he's proud of himself, and I don't mean to sound that way, but it is. It's really engineered phenomenally, and I've got some of the greatest living musicians, bluegrass musicians, that are out there that are all playing on the CD. And I told them it was going to be an art project, and they were excited that it wasn't just bluegrass, because when they get called in on sessions, they got to do the straightaway bluegrass, and they don't get to be as creative. But this, I told them, look, I'm having you guys be a part of this project because you know a lot more than I do, and I want to make sure that you put that in there on the CD, because I'm not capable of it. And so it really turned out to be a real exciting project, and we're just so grateful for it. And people, the album, I designed all the album, or the CD cover, and all the inside and everything, and designed that, and it makes really good coasters for wet drinks like Coca-Cola and stuff like that, It's cardboard, soaks it up.
now that we've heard a little bit of the CD, I think there's going to be a lot of people looking for that tonight too, on Amazon. Road Trip, it's called.
Thank you. I think it's really worth their money. It's really an interesting combination. There's one song on there that I wrote when my wife Rebecca and my mother-in-law and father-in-law, we took a cruise down the Amazon, and we were in Manaus, Brazil, and the cruise ship pulled up to this spot, and there were these loud speakers going on, and it was that Latin pop with techno drums and a little bit of rap going along with the actual lead vocals, and it was just really driving and bouncing, and I just loved it, and it's got that Light Island techno sound to it. So I put one of those, in there too, because it's part of my road trip. My life is out on the road. My wife and I spend a lot of time going to a lot of places, and that was one of the reasons it was titled Road Trip. And then the other reason is people can put it in their CD player when they're, driving down the road, and if they want to have time pass by, they turn it up loud and listen to it, or turn it down low and just have it as background and have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're down to about 13 minutes left, so I'm going to ask Blanche if there's one last question that she'd like to ask CW.
Let's see. When you paint plein air, how do you decide on the scene to paint? When I get out there in the great outdoors, I get overwhelmed by all there is around me. Do you have a set of questions you ask yourself and trying to narrow down what would be interesting to paint?
Well, I said on one of my catalogs that was a whole compilation of paintings that were over in Europe. I said, what was the phrase? Many scenes grab me, but few are chosen. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes with experience. I tell my students, it takes a real experienced, not just a painter, but an experienced artist to know what will translate. And you'd be amazed, and I'm sure it happens to you girls too, and the audience, their neighbor, their parents or their grandparents go, oh, such and such, you ought to see this scene. It's the most beautiful thing. You should really paint it. And you go look at it, and it's 6 billion trees in an overlook with the sky. Well, you better be a real genius and an unbelievable artist to paint that and to make it worthy of painting, or it's just gonna be nothing. So, a subject matter will have enough hallmarks in it that will translate, that will give you enough light-dark pattern, shadow pattern, and design that will really beckon you to paint it. I want the subject to tell me, you cannot walk away and not paint me. You cannot walk away and not paint me. And when I hear that coming into my voice, guess what? I get the stuff out and solve the problems, have an understanding of what I'm doing and how I want it to look and what I want to do to it, and then I paint it. And you know what's amazing? It's kind of like what Michael Jordan was showing the audience in the playoffs when he runs by the scorer's bench and throws up his hands and goes, well, what can I say? Everything he's shooting's going in. You see what I mean? And it's the same thing with your painting. If you really solve the problems and really have an understanding of what you need to do to attack that canvas, it's like the painting paints itself. And I've had several times, believe me, when the Lord's gone, you're done. And I'm going, no, I'm having too much fun. Let me try this. And he goes, you're done. And Carolyn Anderson will tell you, you get a painting to a certain point, and there are a lot of different conclusions that you can come up with. It just depends on what conclusion you want to go with. Now, it takes a seasoned artist to understand that, but that's where she's at, because believe me, she's a very seasoned and one of my all-time favorite friends and one of my all-time favorite figurative painters. There's nobody more poetic with the head and the figure than Carolyn. She trumps everybody, and I love Kwang Ho's figure work, and I love Dan Gerhardt's figure work, and I love Richard Smids and Nancy Gusick, Sue Lyons, Carolyn Anderson's and Sherri McGraw's and David LaFell's. But for the aloofness, for doing the real shorthand of a head and a figure and only putting in the essentials and making it poetic, for my money, there's nobody better than Carolyn.
Well, that's something to know when to stop.
Yeah, it does. It takes a seasoned artist to understand that. But there's times when, even though you know you should stop, don't smack your hands because you're going to go, well, I'm still going to try this, I'm still going to try that. Hey, you're never going to know how far right and left is unless you go out on that limb.
Mhm. And I wanted to just tell everyone, if you're interested in purchasing Road Trip, you can go out to CW's website, and he has a music tab up at the top. Just click on that, and there are places there where you can buy his CD. And if you just click on one of the icons that he has there, like one of them CD Baby and Amazon and a few other places, and just click on there, and you'll go right to that site, right to where CW's CD is, and you can purchase it there. And we're going to go out this evening with one of CW's other songs on that CD. It's called Moonsurf. And CW, this is an opportunity for you to talk about that song a little bit, and also leave us with some parting wisdom.
Well, I just like to share a couple things maybe before you start that up, if it's okay with you girls.
That's absolutely fine.
I'd like to put a little closure on this interview. First of all, what I would like to say is that I can't tell you how honored my wife and I are that you guys would think it would be important to have me on your program. I am very, very honored, and I take it as a great honor and a privilege to do this. I hold it as a great honor and a responsibility to speak to the artists, to try to give them hope and encouragement. That's my gift, the gift that God has given me, the gift of exhortation. My students all know that, and for you that are listening that don't know me as a person, that's what I'm all about. And I also want to say, too, that I hope that I haven't come off arrogant. I will admit I'm very opinionated, and I think you'll find out that some of the better painters that are in this country and around the world are very opinionated. I am opinionated, but I have a lot of experience to base that opinion on. I don't want to come off arrogant, and I apologize to anybody if I've seemed to be arrogant in any way, shape, or fashion, because I don't like arrogant people, and I don't want to come off sounding arrogant. I'm confident, but I also want to tell you, all you artists out there, that there is a lot that CW Mundy can learn, and I learn it from looking at my peers, and I look at it looking from the history of art, and there's always something out there that's inspiring to me, and that's what keeps my passion going, because I can promise you, artists out there, if I don't have any passion towards what I'm doing, I don't even pick up the paintbrush. Don't even think about trying to paint if you don't have the excitement or the thrill, because your painting will be dead as a doornail and won't have anything going for it. You have to find out how you can incorporate passion and have that passion. And if you've got that passion, people have asked me about, well, is it people are just born with all this really great talent and blah, blah, blah? And I go, no, it's like what Bob Knight taught me. I was his first artist illustrator, and it's all about preparation. It's all about persistence. It's all about the work ethic. It's all about the excitement and the drive that will keep you sustained. As I said, it's one thing to launch your career. It's another thing to sustain it. And if you don't have the passion, I can tell you in a heartbeat it won't take your collectors very long to figure out his pen is empty. He doesn't have anything else to say. And so I just wanted to close with that, because I take this, I'm dead serious about this, and as Johanna knows, and some of the other listeners that know me as a person, I'm a joker and I'm dead serious. I'm both. I can laugh and cry at the same time. And but I'm very excited that I've had an opportunity to do this, and I hope that it's an inspiration to you people to get out there and be brave and bold and work your butt off, and you'll be amazed at what you're going to be able to accomplish.
CW, I speak for Blanche here as well. We are very honored that you would come on our little show, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in San Diego, and we hope that you'll come back on our show again.
Hey, I'd love to, man. If people that know me well, I'm not anybody that's short of words. They have to kind of like shut me up. I have to, like I said, if I talk too long and bloviate, you got to bust in there and go, okay, let's go on to the next subject.
Okay, well, I'm going to start Moon Surf now, because I want to get most of this song in here. So Moon Surf is playing. If you want to tell us about it, that's fine, or if you just want folks to listen, that's fine too.
Thank you, CW.
Thank you, Blanche. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
God bless you, girls.
You too.
Thanks.
That instrument that I'm playing is a dobro banjo.
Oh, wow. Heard of dobro guitars.
It's not the typical bluegrass banjo. It's a dobro banjo. Then I've got cello, viola, oud bass, violin.
I think this is my favorite one, CW.
Thank you. My sister said it was so melancholy it almost like depressed her, and I said, "Oh, please don't tell me that."
No,
I don't want to write
it reminds me of when I was on an Alaskan cruise, and I can almost hear like whale sounds. I mean, it's beautiful. I love it.
Oh, it is.
It's a very moody piece, but hey, moody art is some of the most beautiful art ever produced, I think.
Uh-huh.
I'll just put this little plug in here. Pat Cloud, who is my close personal friend, is the greatest living 5-string jazz banjo player alive, and everybody would admit that. And this was Pat's favorite song. He just went nuts over this song. I played it to him over the phone live.
Okay. We're about ready to go off there. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you, CW.
Thank you, girls, and have a great evening, and the audience as well.
Good. You too. Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night.